Hello, and welcome back to another Lunchtime with the Irish Peatland Conservation Council. Today, we're going to explore how you might undertake a peatland habitat assessment. Lunchtime with the Irish Peatland Conservation Council is brought to you with funding support from the Community Foundation for Ireland, and we're going virtual with support from the Irish Environmental Network. Who are the Irish Peatland Conservation Council? Well, we're a national charity, and our mission is to conserve a representative portion of Irish peatlands for people today and future generations to enjoy. We're based at the Bogavalla Nature Centre in Lullymore, Brethanken, County Kildare. We own and manage, in partnership, 5 peatland nature reserves. These are known as Lodge Bog and Lullymore West Bogs in County Kildare, in partnership with the Moyne-Fanuric Development Association, Fenner Bog in County Waterford. We own 8.5 hectares of Gurley Bog in County Meath. Along with other landowners, this is a 100-hectare natural heritage area in Ireland, and our Blanket Bog site, Code Bog in County Kerry. Our work includes peatland site conservation, species monitoring, peatland policy, research and education and awareness. The Save the Bogs campaign is guided by Ireland's Peatland Conservation Action Plans. The charity have developed 7 since our foundation in 1982. The latest conservation action plan is called Peatlands and Climate Change Action Plan 2030, which should be read in conjunction with the Peatland and Conservation Action Plan 2020, Halting the Loss of Peatland Biodiversity. You can learn more about the work of the Irish Peatland Conservation Council and how you can get involved by visiting our website, www.ipcc.ie. So what is a peatland? Well, peatlands are also called bogs, and these are wetlands. They contain 90% water and 10% dead and decaying plants, and they once covered an area of over 1 million hectares in the island of Ireland. They're acidic in nature. Peat is the result of the accumulation of partially decayed plants over thousands of years. The dead plants don't decompose because they grow in waterlogged conditions where there is little oxygen, and this prevents the bacteria and fungi, the agents of decay, from working. As bacteria and fungi, the agents of decay, don't work on a peatland, it means they're extremely nutrient poor. As a result, the peatland plants are all low growing, and a peatland habitat is a wide open landscape. Healthy peatlands have a water table within 20 centimetres of the surface throughout the year. Sphagnum moss is the main peat forming plant, growing 1 millimetre a year and storing 20 times its own weight in water. Peatlands have many values. These are referred to as the ecosystem services, the benefits people obtain from nature. The ecosystem services that Irish peatlands offer us include rich and diverse habitat for biodiversity, water regulation, carbon storage, food, recreational opportunities, and inspiration to artists and poets. If you remember, Seamus Heaney, he described Irish peatlands as Ireland's unfenced country. They're an economic resource and a land bank for agriculture and forestry. For you to assess the condition and quality of your local peatland habitat, there are a number of key indicators within the habitat that you should survey. The first one is sphagnum moss. Remember, this is known as the bog builder, holding 20 times its own weight in water. To help you identify sphagnum moss on your local peatland, here's a simple trick. If you push your fingers down on a moss, and if water oozes between your fingers, it's a strong indication of the presence of sphagnum moss. A healthy peatland will have a carpet of sphagnum mosses covering the bog surface, forming hummocks, lawns, and lining pools. Sphagnum mosses are ranked according to their ability to form peat. Hummock-forming sphagnum are strongly peat-forming. In a healthy bog, peat accumulates at a rate of 1 millimetre per year. Here are some examples of Ireland's sphagnum mosses. Those with high peat forming capacity include Sphagnum austini and Sphagnum fuscum, while those with a low peat forming capacity include Sphagnum cuspidatum. This is known as drowned kitten, and you can find it in bogland pools. Another indicator to look for is bare peat. The presence of bare peat is an indication of damage. This can be as a result of overgrazing, fire, trampling, erosion, or water loss, which has caused the specialised peatland plants to die. Exposed peat leads to increased carbon emissions, erosion, risks of bog bursts, and sedimentation in waterways. The extent of bare peat is an indication of how extreme the damage is. It can occur within small confined patches or large areas. The third indicator to watch for is the evidence of draining or drying. Water can be described as the life's blood of a peatland. The presence of drains on your local peatland means that water is being lost from the site and the water table is lowering. Loss of water causes shrinkage of the peat. This enhances drainage and changes the vegetation in favour of dry bog species, which stop peat accumulation. In times of heavy rainfall, the drainage network increases runoff from the peatland into waterways, which in turn can affect water quality supply. Dissolved organic carbon in the water helps to drive climate change. A fourth indicator is grazing. Bogs are sensitive to overgrazing. In extreme situations, almost all of the living vegetation is removed, and the overgrazed terrain is bare peat. There is also a change in the vegetation with the removal of ling heather and the invasion of sheep's bent. Grazing animals can be sustained on peatlands at low density, less than one sheep per hectare. Burning. Under the Wildlife Act 1976, legislation, it is illegal to burn peatlands from the 1st of March to the 31st of August each year. Burning kills peatland plants, nesting birds and animals. Once the surface vegetation is burnt, the bare peat is subject to erosion. Hot fires may continue to burn within the peat even when the fire is extinguished on the surface. Frequent fires produce flushes of plant nutrients which encourage sedges and grasses. Fire scars on the peatland surface seen from air photographs are evidence of burning. Forested peatlands. Commercial planting of lodgepole pine and sitka spruce is a concern on peatlands. During planting, the peatland is fertilised and drainage ditches are installed. Fertilisation kills the nutrient-poor loving peatland plants and allows more vigorous species such as moorgrass to expand. A dense stand of conifers growing on a peatland provides enhanced cover for predators who predate ground nesting birds on the adjacent open peatland habitat. Ploughing of the peatland causes water runoff and flash flooding. Erosion and cracking of the peat mass causes the buildup of peat sediment in streams, which alters the pH of stream water. In addition to commercial forestry, many peatland sites are being colonised by birch and pine trees due to drainage and burning associated with the processes of peat extraction. In such circumstances, these trees can be regarded as invasive and need to be removed and the drains on the peatland blocked to control the regeneration and restore the peat formation. Invasive species. Typical invasive species on your local peatland may include pitcher plant, rhododendron, and giant rhubarb. The presence of these species harm the peatland by limiting light and blocking rainwater reaching the peatland surface, which can result in the loss of the native peat-forming plants. Many peatland sites are being colonised by birch and pine trees due to drainage and burning during the process of peat extraction. All invasive species need to be controlled on peatlands. And finally, turf cutting and peat harvesting. Any form of peat extraction from your local peatland will have a negative impact on the site. Drains will be visible, there will be a loss of peat building, sphagnum mosses and other wet bog species. The loss of breeding birds such as the curlew, damage to the bog surface where turf is spread to dry, carbon emissions and water loss are all consequences for the community. So using these 8 indicators, you can determine the condition of your local peatland. This will allow you and your community to draw up a restoration plan, a suite of actions to improve peatland hydrological conditions and restore its ecosystem services. So let's remind ourselves, what are the 8 indicators that you're looking for when assessing the habitat quality of your local peatland? Number 1, sphagnum moss. Is there any evidence of bare peat? Is there evidence of drainage? Is there evidence of overgrazing? Has your peatland been burnt? Is there evidence of forested peatlands or indeed the invasion of birch and pine saplings? Is there any evidence of invasive species? And is peat extraction ongoing? Let's have a look at some examples. So the first one is active peat-forming peatlands. Unfortunately in Ireland, this type of peatland is rare. Sphagnum-rich or sedge-rich vegetation should be present. Active peat-forming peatlands will display a dominance in sphagnum mosses, and this can be up to 100% on the site, forming a hummock hollow microtopography. The pH will be acidic. There'll be no evidence of drainage, fire, invasive species, grazing, or visitor trampling. There'll be no bare peat. Ling heather will not be dominant, and the water table will be within 20 centimetres of the bog surface. An active peat-forming peatland in a near natural state will require no restoration measures. Your community as custodians of this peatland should work to ensure no disturbance of the habitat or its biodiversity occurs. To achieve this, monitor the site visually and raise awareness of the value of the ecosystem services your local peatlands provides for all. You also may come across a degraded peatland with the potential to be peat forming. Degraded peatlands with the potential to be peat forming will have pockets of peat forming vegetation within the site. Management can be undertaken to improve the site's overall conditions. Degraded sites will have small areas of bare peat. Drains may be present at the margins, but they do not disturb the entire site. Sphagnum moss will be dominant internally on the peatland, but decreasing or absent at the margins where where you've identified the drains. The pH will be acidic. Ling heather will be dominant at the drier margins of the site or where there is drainage disturbance. And evidence are one or more of the degrading activities such as trampling, overgrazing, peat extraction, scrub encroachment, erosion, burning or drying of the peat surface. Many peatlands have been disturbed by some aspect of human activity. In managing this type of peatland, your priority will be to protect and enhance conditions for active peat formation within the site. A management plan for your site should be developed and restoration actions identified, which may include drain blocking and scrub clearance at the margins to raise the water table. Sphagnum moss transfer to the areas of bare peat and reduce stocking density or installation of bog bridges or boardwalks to reduce visitor trampling may be necessary. We also may come across degraded and actively eroding peatlands. Most peatlands in Ireland have been affected by drainage to some extent. On peatlands where drains have been opened throughout the site, it can lead to extensive drying of the peatland, which in turn can result in bare peat exposure and active erosion. A network of bare peat areas may be visible throughout the site. Drains will be present throughout the site and it will predominantly be dry underfoot. Sphagnum moss, if present, it will only be patchy. The pH will be acidic but rising towards neutral. Ling heather will be dominant throughout the site. Evidence are one or more degrading activities such as trampling, overgrazing, peat extraction, scrub encroachment, erosion and burning will be identified. On degraded and actively eroding peatlands, the impact of restoration activities may be slower to be observed, but in the long term, you will be improving the peatland ecosystem services. The most important restoration activity will be profiling and the blocking of drains to raise the water table so that the bank of carbon stored in the peat within the bog is protected and the conditions are created to encourage the growth of sphagnum mosses. Significant scrub clearance may be required, and over time, with the re-wetting of the peat and confirmation of the acidic pH, sphagnum moss transfer can be considered. Finally, cut over peatlands. Extensive areas of Ireland's peatlands are now considered cut over. These sites usually emerge following decades of turf cutting for domestic use and are highly varied. In some instances, quality secondary habitats of poor fen and swampy birch woodland may develop, but this is rare. Cut over peatlands will display some of the following characteristics: areas of exposed bare peat and overgrown turf cutting peat banks, old spreading garings with intervening drains, uneven terrain with cracks, holes, banks and bridges, bog holes with regenerating sphagnum mosses, peat hags or the remaining area of uncut high bog, recolonisation of the site to woodland, grassland, rushes, bog cotton, scrub, heath, poor fen. The peat will be generally dry underfoot and the pH will range from alkaline to acidic. Drains will be filled with water and vegetation. The presence of bulrush indicates that mineral soil beneath the peat has been reached. Evidence of burning and colonisation by heat star moss and a variable peat depth from 50 centimetres to 4.5 metres. Once the habitats and hydrology of the cutover bog have been assessed, restoration may be an option. Construction of barrier dams can be an effective way to retain water within the cutover and to encourage the spread of the sphagnum mosses or other valuable wetland habitat, including shallow lake, wet woodland, wet grassland and poor fen communities. Re-wetting has the added benefit of protecting the carbon store within the site, prevented from contributing to greenhouse gas emissions. In the upcoming Lunchtime with the Irish Peatland Conservation talks, we'll be exploring peatland habitat restoration measures, such as drain blocking, sphagnum moss transfer, overgrazing, and management for visitors. Remember, today we explored the Peatland Habitat Assessment Guide, and we identified 8 key indicators of the quality of and the habitat of your local peatlands. For now, if you would like to support the work of the Irish Peatland Conservation Council, you can do that by becoming a friend of the bog. You can join us through our website, www.ipcc, or via email and telephone. Our email address is bogs@ipcc.ie, or indeed our telephone is 045 860 133. Don't forget to keep up to date with the work of the Irish Peatland Conservation Council on social media. Farewell for now, and thanks for joining Lunchtime with the Irish Peatland Conservation Council.